Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. I was just using this augmented reality application in order to learn how to properly use the equipment in this gymnasium. Augmented reality, or AR for short, is the overlaying of digital images or information into the real world. The screen on my tablet device acts as a window into this other reality, with the camera analyzing the room in order to understand where the floor is and where I am within the space. This way, the instructors can be overlaid and anchored into the real world, or conventional reality as I like to call it, and I can walk around them. But AR isn't a new thing. Like many other seemingly futuristic technologies, it's actually been all around us for quite some time now. We just didn't think about it. Think about the lines on the field in a sports broadcast, the heads-up display in a car, playing Pokemon Go. Even Snapchat filters or Instagram face filters count as augmented reality because they overlay digital information into the real world. Now, augmented reality shouldn't be confused with virtual reality, or VR. In VR, you'll be completely immersed in a separate virtual world, and you'll probably be wearing a headset just like this one. So if you're in an experience and you see some of the real world, then you're probably in AR. What I really like about augmented reality is that basically everyone has the technology to make and experience it right in their pocket. So stick around today while we show you how to make your own AR experiences. Last episode, we asked you to send us ideas and letters for what I could make in AR, and my gosh, did we get a lot of letters. There's this one from Verenia, which although very sweet, I don't really understand what it is. We received this one from Kurt Michelson, who asked us to make an AR calculator app. And we decided not to pick this one because it didn't need to be an AR experience. It could just be a conventional app. That's an important thing to think about. Then we got this one from Henry, who asked us to make a zombie game in the city where everyone around you turns into a zombie. And while that sounds super fun and interesting in AR, it had an unrealistic expectation for what the technology could do. But then we received this one from Paul, and this one was amazing. He asked us to come up with an AR experience for photographers that helped them explore their environment in order to take pictures from angles or perspectives or locations that they haven't taken before. The reason why we really like this one is because it makes use of the unique strengths and capabilities of the technology, such as designing for 3D space rather than just 2D space. And when you're taking pictures, you're already looking through a digital window into the real world, so the integration doesn't feel forced or awkward. We're going to be making this experience at 3 levels of complexity, so you can all follow along at home. But hold your horses, let's jump into the history zone. Hey Wilson, what have you got planned for us?
Well, Felix, I have a presentation prepared so we can show everybody where it all began. Let's have a look. Our trip through the history of AR begins in 1968 with a man named Ivan Sutherland and his invention, the Sword of Damocles. It was a head-mounted system that tracked a user's head and eye movements in order to display computer-generated graphics. Even though augmented reality wasn't a term created until 1990 by Tom Caudell at Boeing, the Sword of Damocles is considered the precursor to AR systems because of its transparent display. One of the earliest public uses of AR is the NFL's 1st and 10 line. In order to draw accurate lines from every perspective and all the mathematical computations that go into that, this would cost up to about $30,000 per game when it first debuted in 1998. Around the same time, we saw the rise of early consumer examples of AR. In 2003, Sony released the iToy for the PlayStation 2, and in 2009, Esquire magazine used AR to bring the pages of their publication to life. While they didn't quite catch on as well as the NFL Yellow Line, they gave us a peek into how AR could be used for entertainment. In 2012, Google Glass was announced, promising a hands-free smartphone-like experience. Though it didn't fully take off on the consumer level, Google Glass has since been reworked into an enterprise edition, providing help for factory workers. But it did start the rush of consumer AR headsets. In 2016, Microsoft followed with the HoloLens, and in 2018, Magic Leap released the Magic Leap 1. Pokémon Go, an AR mobile game published by Niantic in 2016, was a huge hit and really popularized AR technology within the smartphone world. Niantic caught the attention of over 800 million mobile gamers. Shortly after, Apple and Google released developer tools that handle all the hard math and physics in order to make it easier for people to create their own AR apps. Now that you know how the technology has evolved, we encourage you to go out there and find more examples of AR.
Hi everyone. As we mentioned earlier, what we'll be doing is making an augmented reality app for photographers. And what we want to do is use the strengths of AR in order to encourage photographers to explore their environment in new ways. So what we'll be doing is using paper prototyping, which is one of my favorite tools for trying things out, which means that we just use things that we find around the house like pens and paper and scissors and string. You just get stuck in. And the point of this is to ignore all this digital faff and things that we don't really understand. We just want to use things quickly and try them out before we get too attached to an idea. So for our app, I had this idea of making little creatures that the photographers could be drawn to. So I'm going to draw this little worm here, and that'll draw the photographers down to the ground. That's the idea at least, and I'm going to test that out. And then I'm going to draw a bird. Now birds are pretty tough to draw, so if you want to draw something else, that's fine as well. And it doesn't really matter if you're very good at drawing or not. The point of this is just to try out the experience. Now, I've actually hidden these around the environment already, so we can go explore. But before we go find them, let's think about what we're going to see on the screen when we're navigating the experience. So, what I did earlier was cut out this thing out of this piece of cardboard, and you do that by following these lines, and you fold it along the grooves, and then I've just used some masking tape and put it together, and I'm going to use some more masking tape to stick this to the back of my phone. Whoop! Can be a bit tough. So here we are, and then here, what I've got is a little screen design that I came up with, so I have an idea of how I want to navigate my interface, and we're going to explain more about that later. Now, if you look through my screen here, what you'll see is that I have an interface always in my video. So when I film this, I can see what the experience is really like. Look at that. It's the worm. And now I have this amazing shot of the roller skates. I'm going to save this for later. Oh, and then I'm going to keep on looking around. Hey! It's the bird. Ah. Oh. There we go. And now I have a really great shot of these plants as well. Now you can try that at home as well. So, what I did there was fairly non-interactive. They were just static things and post-it notes when I went up close. But if you're fairly ambidextrous, or if you have a group of friends, what you can do is make it more interactive and add your own animations. What I've done here is I've added the worm to a piece of string, and that means that I could have it, for example, dangling just in front of the shoes, and as I come in to take the picture, I can drag it out of the way so I can take a better picture. I could also do the opposite and have it drop in when I want. Next, what we should do is try and use an actual augmented reality app. Wilson is out on the scene talking to Torch, who will help us with our next prototype.
I'm here with Paul, CEO and co-founder of Torch. Thanks for having us in. Can you tell us a little bit about Torch and what you do?
Yeah, Torch is an augmented reality authoring and design platform where we let people bring in assets, 2D, 3D video, and assemble interactive experiences.
Can you kind of walk us through some of the current state of the AR? I know there's a lot of mobile things like Snapchat and Instagram filters, which a lot of people know about, but they might not be AR.
I actually consider Snapchat in particular, but also Instagram, some of the most dominant augmented reality platforms out today. And what we've not sorted out yet is what is the compelling use cases beyond the face filters. So we're just trying to make it as fast and accessible as possible to create the most compelling augmented reality experiences for both consumer and enterprise. And a lot of the enterprise is being driven by companies that either have seen an efficiency increase, so a real value to being able to pull data and digital interactivity into the real world. So an example of that might be an assembly line worker getting contextual troubleshooting information on the spot.
So just to see if I got this right, it's not just giving them the tools to make the environment, but also kind of the mental thinking and the models to kind of create a great experience. What were some of the considerations you had to think about when designing Torch?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because keep in mind, Torch is also an augmented reality application itself. And so some priorities we placed were on the camera, keeping the camera view clear, and making sure the UI elements are out of the way. There's other interesting considerations as well, like, how do we transition from this being a 2D to a 3D? So our solution for this one is a drag. So when I select this object, it drags into the scene, and in the same gesture, it becomes this 3D object that loads into the scene. And so then once I get it in here and it starts downloading, I can now manipulate it with these gestures, which are now kind of a 2D gesture on glass, but we're interpreting them as 3D manipulations. And then what if we want to get rid of this? If I drag this far enough to the corner, it then becomes a 2D input again, and that's how we can delete it.
Thanks, Paul. Before we go, is there any other big point that you think we might have missed that is worth addressing?
I think our goal is to find the most compelling and unique aspects of this new media platform. And I think I'd like people to consider that gap between digital presentation, digital interfaces, and the physical environment. And that is really where augmented reality shines.
Thanks, Paul. Now let's head back to the studio and see how we can use Torch to improve our project.
So that was super helpful. Thank you, Wilson and Paul. Okay, so now that we know what Torch is, how we should be trying to design our AR experiences, let's try digitizing the idea that we came up last time. For mine, what I want to do is to add in Mr. Worm as a digital worm. So I've got this 3D model of a worm that I'm going to drag into the environment, and I'm going to move him around and scale him to be the size that I want, just behind these shoes. Now, oh, do you see how he doesn't disappear behind the shoes when I move around? So this is a problem of occlusion, which is a fancy way of talking about which objects are in front of the other. The computer has to generate a 3D mesh of your room. And this requires a lot of number crunching, which is why headsets generally have occlusion, but phones are still getting there. Next, let's have a look at Paulette and Pauline, the parrots. While it may look like they're placed correctly, this is actually a trick of the perspective. As Pauline is way further back, she's actually a really big parrot that's just really far away. You can see as I drag her closer, she's much, much bigger. So this shows you why you need to be thinking about perspective as you're designing. You don't really know how your users will be trying out the experience, so you need to try it from lots of different angles. I've added another creature into the environment. Let's see if we can find it. Oh! Wow, there really was an elephant in the room. Let's get it out of the way. There we go. So what I did there was I added in an interactive element into my scene. And that's really important because it adds to the overall richness and depth of your experience. But you need to find a balance, because you have too many moving elements, then it just gets messy. The other reason why I used the elephant is it made really good use of the overall 3D space rather than just keeping the room completely static. Designing 3D elements for a 2D screen is really tough, so you better start practicing. While I start programming the next prototype, let's catch up with Wilson to see what misconceptions there are about augmented reality so that we can make more informed decisions in our next idea.
Like many technologies, AR is often depicted in unrealistic ways to the public. Here are some things to watch out for. The first is the field of view, or the area around you, which you can see through a device such as glasses or an AR headset. Now, most commercials will show that AR headsets have a full field of view. Something like this. See how the AR elements fill everywhere around me? That's pretty cool, right? But actually, AR headsets have a limited field of view. This is because they use tiny little projectors in them to project images onto the lenses. So it ends up looking a bit more like this. Although your eyes still maintain their full field of view, the AR elements are only projected directly in front of you. This means you have to turn your head and look around you in order to see them. Something to keep in mind when designing your experience. But big tech companies aren't the only ones giving false impressions of AR. Science fiction books and movies have been using the technology for a long time now. And what makes for a great visual experience doesn't always work out for practical reasons. Whoa! Look at this scene in Minority Report. The floating computer interface looks pretty cool. But try holding your arms up like this for more than 30 seconds. Gets tiring, doesn't it? Hey look, it's my favorite superhero, Iron Man. His helmet is super neat. It shows him a lot of information to fight the bad guys. But in my opinion, it's a little too much information. When designing an AR, you don't want to overwhelm your user with too much. On traditional screens, there's only one layer of information, and on AR, there's much more. We can see Iron Man's helmet also shows personal data and identifies people, which brings up a huge question about privacy, something to always consider when working with any technology. What information should we display, and what should we hide when exploring the world? Is it okay to show the names of people passing by? What if it's a close friend, or if it's to keep you safe? How does that change your mind? Remember, when designing anything, it's important to think about not just yourself, but the wide variety of people who will be using what you're making. Things that seem like a good idea aren't always the best in practice. You just have to test it out first. Now, let's head back to the studio and apply these concepts to our photography app.
Let's combine everything that we've learnt today into our final iteration. There are lots of elements to consider here, so let me show you what I've been doing. Back in our first prototype, we used paper prototyping, and I was drawing my user interface onto a post-it note. Do you remember? Well, now I've found a way to digitize that so you can see and read about the characters that you've discovered. User interface design, or UI design for short, is its own rabbit hole, and it's quite complicated. But it's important to understand if you want your users to be able to navigate your experience well. If you've ever tried a confusing app, you'll know exactly why it's so important. Now, the other thing that I've been doing is designing and animating my own 3D characters. Now, you might notice that they're quite stylized and cartoony. And that's because photorealism isn't actually the most important thing in an augmented reality experience, even though you might think so. Better technology won't necessarily lead to a better experience. It's about bringing a strong value. If you think about the fact that we're happy with low-quality memes and videos on Instagram and YouTube, even though we have 4K television available to us at our fingertips. The most important thing is bringing forth an emotion, like sadness or happiness or excitement. Finally, I've also programmed a geo-tracking system into my experience. This means that the characters will change depending on what environment I'm in. So I'm thinking maybe if you're in a drier environment, maybe you'll get a zebra coming up, whereas in other times you might get something like a polar bear coming up. Thinking about what Wilson told us about the ethics of designing an augmented reality app, I decided to only use the geo-tracking feature when the app is open, but there are a lot more things you should consider. Thank you, Ants. Thanks. Now, as you may have noticed, that was a much more involved process than the previous stages we went through. Luckily, there are lots of resources online to help get you started. We recommend learning about user interface design in Sketch or Illustrator, learning about 3D design for Unity, learning how to code for ARKit, and learning a bit about photogrammetry, which is a fancy way of talking about a way of taking pictures of something in order to generate a 3D model of it. Torch also has a lot more resources online if you'd like to learn more about the theory behind augmented reality design. So that was the last iteration of my photography AR app. It went through a lot of phases, but I'm actually really happy with where it ended up. That was a lot, and that's all we've got time for today. But before we go, let's quickly recap what we've learned. First, you can use paper prototyping in order to quickly test out ideas at home. Try to think of ideas that use the unique capabilities of augmented reality. Second of all, there are lots of existing apps, such as Torch, that allow you to quickly jump into AR in order to test out an idea without having to do any programming. And third, if you really want to do some programming, even though it's quite complex, there are lots of resources online that will help get you started. Now, what we've covered today is a lot about what you can do and what you could do. But really, the most important question is what you should do. And there aren't any correct answers here. But over the course of this episode, we've hopefully given you the tools and vocab in order to explore this question yourself and to form your own opinions. I'm really glad you stuck around today. Next week, we'll be looking at projection mapping. So send me your letters and maybe I'll make one of them. Bye-bye.